It's great to have everyone back for the second session. Thanks for those who stayed in the morning. It was really wonderful set of conversations, and I think it's exciting to have the room brimming with intelligence and also joy and curiosity and questioning around this nebulous question of the planetary. Yeah, thrilled to continue that conversation with our next three speakers. This is a slide from the last the early remarks, but really just again to thank everyone who made this possible. Thank you. It's a vast number of students who have assembled this planetary living room here today with their own lamps and so on, and also all the back of house work that goes into organizing. So Xiaoxi, Darwin, everybody has been fantastic and amazing. There's a pop-up exhibition that you might have walked through on the way down. This is the GSAPP student group Toxos in that landing area between the lift and the basement level. So go check that out on your way out or in. And I think they'll have a closing event next Thursday. So keep a lookout for that. Shout out to the students who made that happen as well. But yeah, I think really I'm not going to redo the remarks, but just to recap from this morning, unlike the typically hubristic ways in which the planetary is invoked in industrial and technological imaginaries, and you definitely broke those down this morning. The symposium does not attempt to initiate some singular future or way of seeing, but ways of recognizing how we are situated within a far larger set of planetary earthly relations, and how this may not serve to abstract further, but to perhaps ground us in kind of new common futures. So if the planet is impossible to see without mediation, the planetary media, I guess this is the pairing of those two terms, is an invitation to think about what bridges the gap between representation and reality across different scales, magnitudes, and measures. So this second session called Planetary Sensibilities, how can we think through and with matter and environments themselves, and the kind of work of organizing and kind of resistance and modes of operation that I think fall under the radar a lot of the times in this environmental work, and thinking about where we are situated, where we are, variously positioned when we try to look at something collectively, rather than at the end of a microscope or a telescope. Let's, begin in the middle. So this is really just a smattering is what I showed from everybody's work this morning, and there's so much more than what we see here, but it's very exciting to kind of steep, and also a lot of the things that were brought up in the morning session we can continue to, I think, build on in this final conversation towards the end of this symposium. So this was the morning. We had Alenda Chang, Tager Brain, Daniel Jacobs, and Gökçe Günel. And this afternoon we have the pleasure of listening to Macarena Gomez-Barris, Ainslee, Alem, Robson, who just scanning the room to see if, yes, okay, excellent. And on Zoom we have Territorial Agency, represented by John Palmesino, and Ann-Sofi Rönnskog. And we'll follow with responses and conversation with our invited guests and faculty. So we will do more of that, but I will really just jump into introductions. This was an initial, I think, series of thoughts that I put together while making the remarks, but I think as we move forward, we can start to really tease out, like we talked about scale and protocol and a number of other things that relate to this imaginary called the planetary this morning. Like how do we continue to think with and also against this framing, and perhaps an ethic of vulnerability, which I would love to also ask in the Q&A. So without further ado, Macarena Gomez-Barris is an interdisciplinary scholar, speaker, and author of 4 books and dozens of essays and interviews on environmental media, decolonial theory and praxis, queer femme and creative and embodied research methods, and what she deems as antidotes to the colonial Anthropocene. Her work addresses artful living and survivance in spaces of social and ecological suffering, and include her book, The Extractive Zone, Social Ecologies and Decolonial Perspectives, which we read in class. Shout out to my Wasteworks students whose zines are on the back wall. She is also the author of Beyond the Pink Tide, Art and Political Undercurrents in the Americas, 2018, that thinks from submerged perspectives and art making, social movements, and creative intellectual labor to imagine worlds anew. Her first book, Where Memory Dwells, Culture and State Violence in Chile, 2009, traces fascism, the rise of neoliberalism, and memory's obliteration as central to the nation state. Her co-edited volume with Herman Gray of Toward, A Sociology of a Trace, addresses global sites of deep cultural imprint and the invisible work of tethering lives of sustenance after catastrophe. Her new book, which is very exciting to hear about, At the Sea's Edge, Duke University Press, considers the fluidity of colonial transits and the generative space between land and sea. And also just shout out to Macarena's Symposium tomorrow at Brown University. I think that part of it is online, so definitely check that out. It's called Extractive Zones in the Digital Age. I might also just introduce the other speakers to kind of save on time. And yeah, we can move from there. So Ainslee Alem Robson is an Ethiopian-American writer, director, and media artist whose films explore suppressed histories of resistance through the portals of national, collective, and personal memory. Blending nonfiction, speculation, and Afro-surrealism, Robson's works speak from a space of liminality within the African diaspora. She crafts emancipatory narratives and counter-imaginings, harnessing film, new media, and installation. Her works have premiered and been exhibited by film festivals and art spaces such as Tribeca Film Festival, South by Southwest, IDFA.lab, Venice Architecture Biennale, Ars Electronica, and the New York Times. She received the Sundance Humanities Fellowship and is an IDA Per Lawrence grantee and Black Public Media grantee. In 2025, Ainslee joined the inaugural cohort of Sankofa Film Institute's Around the Fire writing and directing intensive led by Haile Garima. She's currently working on her first nonfiction feature titled Empress Tetu. And joining us remotely, we have architects John Palmesino and Ann-Sofi Rönnskog of Territorial Agency. Territorial Agency promotes comprehensive territorial transformations in the Anthropocene. Their work focuses on integrating science, art, architecture, advocacy, and action in addressing climate change challenges. Grounded in spatial and territorial analysis using remote sensing, they represent complex transformations of contemporary inhabited territories. Territorial Agency is a leader in architecture's relationship to Anthropocene with projects like How Heavy is a City, Anthropocene Territories, Oceans in Transformation, Sensible Zone, Plan the Planet, Museum of Oil, and Anthropocene Observatory. John and Ann-Sofi are unit masters at the AA Architectural Association School of Architecture, London. They were also awarded the STARTS Prize of the European Commission for Innovation in Technology, Industry, and Society, stimulated by the Arts for Oceans in Transformation, and are the chief curators of the 7th Lisbon Triennale and members of the Anthropocene Working Group. So without further ado, Macarena, please.
I really want to thank Amlin and to the organizers, and especially Chris, for accommodating me for the opportunity to be here. Today, I'm just going to present very briefly from my in-progress book that's actually called Decompositions at the Sea's Edge. And it's about the fragile and watery sites that counter-archive planetary disaster. It's really addressing creative practice and writing in impossible times. I mean, we have to just keep foregrounding the terroricide, the genocide, ecocide, feminicide that's ongoing. And it's also considering how decomposition unwrites what I've termed the colonial Anthropocene, and not to create and proliferate vocabularies about the Anthropocene, but really to specify ahead of the Anthropocene its coloniality and that character of colonialism. So I really want to ask with you, what are some of the methods and the epistemes that actually offer modest proposals? I'm not sure that the discipline of architecture is in the business of modest proposals, but I'm actually thinking with a kind of, another kind, not of a planetary agenda, say, but really, I think a student was talking about grounded forms or forms of thinking through material and animate structures a palimpsestic approach to environmental media and mediums, and embodied ways of knowing that have texture and are texturized by the environment. So this is work that follows, it's kind of a third part of my study, really. It follows the extractive zone that, if you've read that, thank you to some of you who have, it was a 10-year study of South American extractive industry in a moment of transitional economies, in a moment when we are beginning to see larger forms of extractivism that are now mega extractivism. I think that language is really important around scale. And also the study of Beyond the Pink Tide that really was investigated the undercurrents and the forms of kind of social ecological thought and the nexuses between artists, thinkers, practitioners, makers, that really is currently taking expression in the Elemental Media Lab. That is a kind of hybrid form at Brown University that we're experimenting also with RISD and in collaboration with RISD, and I invite you to find that work online. So I'd begin by noting that, like many compound words in the English language, the sea edge comes from an etymology born in the polluted condition of 18th and 19th century era of colonial discovery, scientific taxonomy, and extractive plunder. It's often that tripartite nexus. And the term was first coined by William Scoresby's work and the mappings as a way to mark the edge of the ice shelf and snowpack in Greenland, and a way to, quote unquote, guide the whale ship, a safe passageway for the blubber industry. Now, the industry is so important here in the Northeast, right, but also globally, to consider the historical significance of thingifying, the thingifying of the more than human, commodifying it, and the underpinning that is the blubber industry in terms of kind of the carbon extractive economy. This is an industry that you might have read in Das Kapital or any part of Marx's oeuvre is part of the primitive accumulation, of course, that separates the human from natura, right? Or from the non-human world, which is also the metabolic rift. I think that language of the metabolic rift is kind of coming back into the literature, and it's an important way to think of that kind of severance point. But also in Mapuche indigenous cosmologies from the global south and the deep south of South America, the idea of the severing of the pluriversal world. So what does it mean to think with the pluriverse and multiple beings and that kind of all the textured in between spaces? So against that extractive viewpoint and the violent settler reorganization of land and sea and perception, I'd also say against the inattention to language in the academy, right? To me, there's a way in which we often reproduce the settler approach by not fully troubling questions of scale, method, or the monoculture of language that we use in the academy. So this is part of the book's work, is to actually intervene at the scale of idioms and grammars and languages, and poetics, and offer poeses. So the book is organized into 20, hopefully less extractive scenes to get us beyond the binary between extractive and non-extractive that are situated along the sea's edge, focused mostly along the Pacific Ocean. These are 20 scenes that screed within a minor register alongside a number of thinkers who have used 20 as a form, and what form does to actually encapsulate some of these ideas. So, for instance, the anti-colonial politics of Ami Cesar. There were 20 short chapters in Discourse on Colonialism. And there are 20 kind of forms of love poems in Pablo Neruda's 20 love poems in A Song of Despair. So also, what is that Song of Despair? And I will attend to that in a minute. 20 scenes that use elemental methods to decompose, not so modest maybe in the proposal, the military and capitalist matrix through feminist and queered and embodied artistic practice. So today I'm just going to share one piece of that. I can't get to more. And then maybe the beginnings of another. And then I'll end with an invitation that was in some ways already offered. At the surface, we see glittering words that texturize the seascape. The glittering sea of words on the oil blue and yellow canvas of the socialist feminist painter May Stevens of 1981 is a painting that helps me really perceive the fragility and the plushiness of language, meaning, and the colonial residue that accrues at the sea's edge, And in particular here, I'm writing about the memoryscape and the intimate relations as part of the smaller scale of the media Planetary. Again, less as propositional, which is I know is central to the understanding of the built environment. I'm more thinking with fragments or social traces or the missing links or what is unsaid and unstated or in intimate relation. The palette of her water paintings is often described as subdued, but I'm enchanted into May's color world of thick paint that uses this glittering representation of sun and moon and light on water. And to accomplish this effect, she literally writes over the sea waves, inscribing the liquid territory with silver and gold, sometimes asemic poetry, with her hand. The water paintings that were completed between the 1990s and 2009 were May Stevens' last body of work, and she died about at the age of 92, I believe. And the bodies of water that she described and painted were part of what she called her chosen kin. Bodies of water that she engaged with as a swimmer, a walker, a lover of muck and light, and a lifelong intimate relationship with sea and river edges, whether it was the Pacific salt flats and marshes or the sweet water bodies of Massachusetts and New York that were so important to the artist. But also she paints repetitively these, I don't have an image of it, but these sea bodies and river bodies with her mother in front of them, sometimes as a double image, sometimes as a kind of subconscious figure, sometimes as the mother standing in for water bodies themselves. On the surfaces of the oil paintings, May creates a shimmering layered surface with passages taken from texts by Virginia Woolf and Julia Kristeva, passages that inscribe the water with a specific Western feminist intellectual and writerly genealogy. And this is a practice that I think is linked to the kind of activist work that she did as one of the founders of the magazine Heresies, right, a feminist publication on art and politics that was published from 1977 to 1992. So what I'd say is that there is in the paintings a slippage between day and night, between text and light, the cockaswirl of the sand, metals, and rock. And as May said memorably of the water paintings, I want not to be afraid to be beautiful and not to value intellect or wisdom over beauty. I want them both. I refuse the binary. I refuse to choose between them. I've always wanted to think about no politics without poetry, no poetry without politics, end quote. As I've hinted at already, these texts are reproduced on top of the water, not as an act of elemental occupation or propositional framework, but of a kind of new rendering of what's not there or what is there, but as a kind of intimate and perhaps even erotic collaboration with the liquid surround. The inscription technique does not replace and destroy, of course, the settler kind of impetus or the settler gaze of landscape painting that constructs territory as vacant or as terra nullius, say as those of the mid-19th century Hudson River School. And I'm sorry to pick on the Hudson River School, it's just low-hanging fruit, right? So instead, Stevens' inscriptions adds another layer to the palimpsest, this kind of sense of precise and tiny writing made by her hand. This technique of imprinting or graphing the land can be conceptualized as maybe as an act of remapping. And in the extractive zone, I discussed it in relationship to the work of mestiza multimedia artist Carolina Caicedo in her 38-minute video called Land of Friends. You can get it, it's readily available. Stills from that film show how the Magdalena River in the southwest Cauca Valley of Colombia is actually written back into the extractive scene of disaster. So with her hand, she literally paints over the Google image, and not here, but in other images, and kind of that severed river is painted back in where those ghost tributaries are given life and brought back, the river's brought back to life. So in my mind, this is the kind of counter-palimpsestic act or work, writing back into the satellite image, a directed and embodied gesture of calling out the neocolonial damage done by energy capitalism in the global south. A viewpoint as a way for us to perceive and notice the disappearances, the damage, the scars of river damming as a result of electrifying the urban landscape, And also noting the kind of moment of that. And I already indicated this, but I want to say that this was in 2011 when she was making this work, and what it meant to predate these higher levels of extraction, AI in rural spaces, or what we might call sacrifice zones, which, as you probably know, already takes up almost 2% already of all global energy consumption. So against that kind of view, or more overt anti-extractivist political framing that renders climate catastrophe by really compressing scales of the sublime, it would be really easy to read May's comparatively serene paintings as somehow less political, less impactful, or less about the violent afterlives of capitalism's rapaciousness. But I would ask, what else dwells inside of May Stevens' blue-green and then later blackened visualities of water? So, during an 11-year period from 1979 to 1990, predating the water paintings and leading up to them, May dedicated her entire body of work to Rosa Luxemburg. This began with a kind of realist documentary image work that rendered the Socialist Internationalist movement and moved, and also was about freedom fighters, and she kind of was a part of that kind of anti-war movement in Vietnam, and really doing all of this kind of work. And she moved from these kinds of compositions or depictions of historical events to actually creating void spaces. And these void spaces are kind of replete, and here I'm thinking a little bit with Jack Halberstam's forthcoming work, void spaces that have this kind of historical interpretation about the kinds of systematic criminalization of the feminist, radical, intellectual, and political tradition. For me, and it's hard to see all of the detail there, the signature work in the series is actually called Another Country. The movement of the painting hovers around the swirl and the blackened oil painting. There's the block of silver at the lower right corner, showing that writing is almost, undecipherable, and the painting's title is actually somewhat redacted. Redaction, as a form of anticipating the so-called War and Terror. The inscription that accompanies the swirling of water of the river body to absorb Luxemburg's body, who of course was assassinated and dumped, her body dumped into the murky space of Berlin's Landwehr Canal, where her body was later recovered. So this is the kind of move then to consider the point of view of the witness. What is it that the canal water remembers? What is it the canal chooses to forget? Redaction, as Angeline Nath writes in a forthcoming book called 1,000 Paper Cuts, actually contends with how empire and the bureaucratic life of war use redaction as an anti-communist language. The way that counterinsurgency documents and justifies the hunting of the terrorist it has borne. In May's work in the painting, the colorful purple splash opens the invisible space, but is also kind of pregnant with emergent possibility, the swirling water potential of the mass strike to come. If you look closely, you can see that it also says, and it's almost redacted, but that was in another country. So she's making those comparisons very early on between kind of forms of authoritarianism, fascism, that I think are really important. So this next part is very brief, but it's about the kind of ways that one imprints not only on the kind of, media, but on each other. For me, I connect this work on water to my friendship with May, who I first met right ahead of September 11th, 2001. We actually watched the Twin Towers kind of falling together. And we were in the Marin Pacific coastline upon Miwok territory at the Headland Center for the Arts. Does anyone know the Headland Center for the Arts? You should all get residencies there, just saying. It's actually a really beautiful place of elemental exchange between sea and fog and wind and erosion in the space of ruinous settler military occupation, despite the 700-year exchange of that elemental project. The collaboration between us was really a set of intergenerational conversations that fell out of normative time and that continue to inform my work and thinking about how to perceive and think with submerged perspectives. All of this is part of work we did together by merely walking as a counter mapping, or what Ateya, a postdoc currently at the Center for Environmental Humanities that I direct, has framed as wet ethnographies. And I love that framing of thinking with wet ethnographies as part of kind of being immersed with the liquid land. So alongside the kind of Pacific Sea edge, there was a kind of sense of the remnants of war and empire. We were comrades, and later we became close friends, in part by talking about this ongoing commitment that each of us had to really making visible what Nelson Maldonado Torres, the philosopher, calls the paradigm of war, to not think of war as episodic or an exception, but it's ongoing. We have just some periods maybe of a break from war rather than the other way around. So this kind of sense of that space was overrun by this military occupation, but at the same time, there was this other level that was in the native grasses that were beginning to grow back in the ground and be kind of recultivated as another form of resurgence. It's also in this space, a frontier space situated near the Golden Gate Bridge and Alcatraz Island. I will not say anything about the current condition of Alcatraz Island and those proposals, but the history that really spans there is such a long sweep of time, right, between the Spanish conquest to the gold rush to the Cold War era. I think it felt really important to us at the time to not buy into the idea that the architectural reconversion of military space was the answer. In fact, it was a utopic promise to reconvert that place. And the Headlands, you might know, the Headlands Center for the Arts used to be Fort Barry, and that entire coast in the San Francisco Bay Area is about shipbuilding and immigrants to do that shipbuilding, and Rosie the Riveter, and all of this kind of power plant industry, shipping containment, port, etc. But what it was the kind of decommissioned buildings that were transferred to the National Park Service in 1972. The amnesia of that utopia was that in the work between scientists, architects, poets, writers, and visual artists, that the land was converted into this alternative, but what was kind of amnesic there was that from 1953 to 1979, the Nike missiles had been built by the US Army, and they were 300 missiles ready to launch at that site across the Pacific to North Korea and the Asian Pacific more broadly. All of this is submerged in the subsoils. All of this is part of the remnants of the US post-World War II military machine. All of this haunts and saturates the empire and of the landscape. So for us, I also want to mention that part of the walking was across these brown fields, which in Italian, I don't know if anyone's from Italy here, but there's a more meaningful word that literally means like derelict sites of contamination, where it's just brown fields in English language, right? So later, I saw these maps full of PCPs and asbestos and the command bunkers. The soil had been dangerously contaminated. Brownfields, that term that literally racializes territory, brownfields as the intoxicated landscape that is radiating its presence. So for me, what it meant to forge this feminist queer connection was to dwell in the poetry of May's work, but also to think about these kind of spaces of invisible and broken relations, indigenous and otherwise. For us, we decided that the monocultural design of the Western Onto episteme really didn't give us, we weren't able to find other places outside of it. And I just want to say that those conversations, remain really impactful. So I guess I want to kind of continue on and suggest that the kind of work of representation is so important that we were talking about in the early parts of the panel and earlier today. There are these ways to decompose the extractive view through embodied theory and writing, ways that differently attend to the sea's edge. And I'm thinking here with Epili Haofa that the edge is not solid or continental, but has a Pacific Islander indigenous orientation to ocean, and that there's an historical archive to the Pacific that moves beyond, say, the usual reference to Rachel Carson, though important, which describes the sea edge as a place of wonderment and awe. So what does it mean to actually move into the space of memory, collective memory, communal practice, and that non-binary space between land and sea, a place that's witnessed devastation, a place of the colonial rift? So in this last short section, and I won't have time to do it justice, and this is a gorgeous work, I really want to think with the remnants at the sea's edge through the undercurrents and the submerged memories of the work of Jane Jin Kaizen's liquid palimpsestic film archive about the Korean War and its afterlives. This is an 11-minute film from 2024, and for me, it takes us also into that space of imperial, the kind of representational void space of imperial residue. And the work here is to grieve an entire generation of male Korean soldiers and Jeju Island residents that were massacred by the US Army in scorched earth campaigns during the early 1950s. So there's something for me about the kind of beauty and terror of being on one side of the Pacific edge and then traveling into the oceanic archive of the other one that says something to me about those interconnected planetary mediatic spaces. In her film of last year, underwater footage shows the tumultuous sea superimposed with a propaganda film produced by the US Army and embodies a kind of filmic tableau work of memory as a kind of texture of the modern experience of colonialism. And again, that is one of the propositions of decolonial work, is that these things are not separated. The modern and the colonial cannot be disentangled, that they both are kind of ongoing condition. So this is the wreckage of war, the sense of dividing of landmass, that is Korea and Koreans into North and South Korea, but also the existing divisions throughout the Korean diaspora. And wreckage, too, refers to a few years before the outbreak of the Korean War, when state authorities and rightist paramilitary groups waged a red hunt in South Korea's Jeju Island that is so central to this kind of unleashing of a genocidal violence upon large parts of the civilian island population. As Kaizen writes about the work, the only way for her to remember this was to work through another medium, a survivor of the massacre, a shamanic practice through Kosunan, and Kosunan had been collaborating with Kaizen for about 10 years. The work of the film is really through this sonic track, and you can hear it just a little bit there, but it's this chanting to the dead, this work of the living chanting the dead, and the mother in the maternal sea body talking about war and memory, but also a lament, and she interchangeably takes on the voice and point of view of herself as mother, but herself seeing the son and embodied within her. So the body of her deceased son that was never recovered from the sea. So the sea literally as another kind of architectural archive of the deceased. Again, this is kind of found footage, and then she's put this all together with this beautiful long chant that, if you'd like, feel free to email me, since I don't have time to, like I said, do it justice. But the bubbles, the work of the sea, the languages of the sea is really central to the work. During this entire work of the 20 scenes that I'm talking to you about, it's been really shocking to me because one thing that's emerged is glitter. Glitter as an aesthetic of shine that has pointed me to this archive of war and reoccupation. You wouldn't think that it would be glitter, but I don't know why it keeps coming back. So I've been asking in a kind of elemental way, does the glitter remember? What does the glitter remember? What is the flickering image? What is the interaction between surface, and depth that's pointing to what lies submerged? For me, this is part of a kind of work to think about the many ways I've been imprinted in myself by water bodies. In my embodied submerged research, accompanied by the queer photographer Soraya Zaman, we hiked into the waters in Dead Horse Bay in Brooklyn a couple of years ago, about 13 miles from here. Literally, as I waded into the water, I felt the radiation of toxicity. It's a place that artists go to make work. but it's also a way to feel a common cause with the deadened water body, or what we have done in the hyper-industrialization. I waded into the oil, into the refuse, into electronic parts, watching the door of a refrigerator float by. For me, this was a kind of way to get closer to May's asemic writing and imprinted writing, a way to get closer to Caicedo's embodied gesture, a way to understand what Kaizen was doing as a form of embodied accompaniment, a way to visualize and dwell with the stains and corrosions of the earth, in the sea, in the water, in ourselves, in myself. Dwelling as a practice, as an adaptation, not as an adaptation to the presumed timeline of oil extinction, but dwelling as an eco-queer practice of witness. In these times of ruination for me, I write these sea of words, like May's words, to observe, to intimate, to imagine, to witness in impossible times, to witness as a form to survive. And I'll leave you with that, and I'll leave you also with the invitation for tomorrow night as part of the Center for Environmental Humanities work that we're doing, an online work that stretches and invites all of us into this network to understand, theorize, and refuse extractive zones in the digital age. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, so I'm talking about memory as material. So, this is a photo of my great-grandfather, Anyazmach Tarrafa, and he contributed to resistance efforts fighting against Mussolini's fascist occupation of Ethiopia, known as the Second Italo-Ethiopian War in the 1930s. I just want to start by saying that this is the lineage that I come from, and that this spirit of resistance animates my artistic practice. And I'm interested in building from memory, using emancipatory narratives in order to construct and empower more decolonized futures. I understand memory as something material, something spatial, and something that can be composed, inhabited, and shared. So today I want to think through this idea: what does it mean to treat memory as material? And how might that reshape how we think about the planetary? So I'll start by sharing two African philosophies on memory and time that have shaped my practice, and then I'll get into a few projects. So Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol from the Ghanaian logographic writing system, meaning go back and get it. You can see the feet of the bird are facing in one direction, but the head is turned backwards over the shoulder. So in order to move into the future, we must go back and confront the past. And then I'm also interested in this idea of tizita. And Eleni Santim-Zalaka writes in her book, Historical Materialism, that the word tizita has three related meanings in Amharic. The first is memory and the act of memory, which some translators also associate with the English word nostalgia. And the second meaning refers to a scale or a mode of Ethiopian music, a pentatonic scale. And the third meaning incorporates the first two meanings by referring to the music as a musical scale and popular song form. An actual tizita song has the ability to capture the complex ways in which memory conveys both collective and individual experience. Okay, there we go. And at the same time, tizita is a formal musical style which positions lack and longing as the song's spatial and temporal coordinates. Lack is here, longing is then. Which leads me to my virtual reality experience called Ferenj, a graphic memoir in VR. It's a visual dialogue between memory, reality, and the digital in an immersive memoir about Ethiopian American mixed race identity and the concept of home. I was thinking about absences and presences within the imagery of my cultural background. And I had seen many images from my father's side of the family, from his childhood, from his hometown. That's the American side of me. And then from my mother's side, there were maybe 4 photos I've ever seen. And she's from a small town called Gore in Ethiopia, which is really difficult to get to. I've never been there. You have to like fly to a neighboring city and then go something like 9 to 12 hours on a bus. And it's not necessarily safe. So her hometown and her childhood memories and a big part of where I'm from felt really inaccessible. So what I had to work with were her stories as I was trying to excavate and understand my Ethiopian identity and my relationship to it. And so I was thinking, how do I represent a place that only exists for me as secondhand memories from my mom? And I ended up using photogrammetry, a technology often associated with precision, surveillance, and extraction, to reconstruct my perception of my mother's memories in order to build a material counter-archive for myself to resist the hegemonic narratives I unwillingly absorbed in my psyche from the Eurocentric and predominantly white educational systems I attended.
Before I knew what it was, race and its divisions were embedded in my daily life. No one at school or at home looked like me. I can't say that I'm from here, but I can't say that I'm not either. What is home?
So I began creating an archive of, that was the trailer of the experience, by the way. I began creating an archive of 3D scans that spoke to my memories. So I was based in LA at the time, and I crowdsourced the source materials. So pretty much I asked friends and family located in Ethiopia, and actually, I couldn't find anyone in Gore, so all of these are from Addis Ababa, the capital city. And then also in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, and where I grew up pretty much going to my parents' Ethiopian restaurant after school every day. We were the only Ethiopian restaurant, the first one and the only one in Northeast Ohio for 30 years. And so I'm in LA. I have people in both of these locations, and I'm sending them diagrams of how to do a 3D scan. And this was in 2018, before, now there are apps like Polycam where you could do it perfectly, just on your phone. But this was a series of videos that were captured on different people's mobile phones. And then they sent them to me oftentimes on WhatsApp. So then it was like down-resed. And then I processed them anyway. And no one followed my diagrams. Everybody did it wrong. And I really liked how that ended up looking. I felt that it really, I ended up having all these it was lacking precision, all these distortions. It was inverted, broken, and super fragmented, like my process of collecting these images of that represented my identity. And I animated them to form and to explode at different moments in the script where you hear about a moment of groundlessness or an impasse or a moment of internal conflict. And I found that I found the failures of the technology to be really interesting. It doesn't pick up glass or water or reflective surfaces, but this whole process was me trying to reflect on my identity. And conceptually, I really like that. And it just mirrored my experience, my own experience of hypervisibility and invisibility and identity. Here are a series of these videos. So as you can see, people are moving. They're not supposed to move, they're supposed to be perfectly still. That's what they ended up looking like. So I found that these fragments of everyday life really contributed to an archive that I didn't have of images of my mother's Ethiopia, even though I am an unreliable narrator because it's my perception of her memories, which are probably already distorted. But overall, it's this fragmented archive that represents this narrative of Ethiopia that I wasn't necessarily accessing at school. And it countered the hegemonic narratives of inferiority and Africa not contributing to global knowledge generation or basically having any value So that's what these images represent to me, and that's the importance that this archive carries, and why I was interested in turning this into an experience, a virtual reality experience. And in the experience, you pass through the kitchen in the restaurant, and then float into parts of Cleveland and my family's home, and then end up in parts of Addis Ababa, and then in the end, you're in this impossible geography, going from my bathroom window to the market to a taxi back to the restaurant. Okay. And then I was invited to adapt this into an installation. And I was, basically my goal was to take it outside of the headset, and because one issue I had with VR was that it's such a, I mean, it's only one person experiencing the work at a time. And so much of this work is about the importance of this Ethiopian restaurant as a space of gathering. And I wanted people to be able to gather around the experience. So I ended up creating this box as a projection surface, and this is inspired by the Ethiopian rakabot, which is the table that is used, it's kind of at the bottom here, in the traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony. And how many people here have experienced a coffee ceremony, an Ethiopian coffee ceremony? Anyone? No? Okay. So we start by roasting the beans, green beans, taking them out for everyone to smell, grinding them up, and then serving coffee in these small cups. And most of this process is done just sitting right there, usually in front of whoever's with you. This is something that happens usually on a daily basis, if not multiple times in a day, in someone's household. And it's not only a common practice in Ethiopia, but also around the diaspora. And depending on how well the conversation goes, there might be 3 rounds of coffee. They're named Abol, Tonan, Baraka. They're the 3 rounds, and they're all different. Each name is a blessing. And we burn frankincense. And to me, the coffee ceremony is, I was thinking about how it exists at different scales and what that means. So it's pretty much I would say, like, for me, the modern day sitting around the fire where elders tell you stories, oral histories, and I think it's the site of the transference of intergenerational knowledge. So that's why I wanted that to be the surface that the film was projected onto in the adaptation. And so I went back and I filmed the spaces that I had originally scanned, and I'll show you a clip. So the film moves between Addis Ababa and Cleveland within the restaurant, but it never allows those places to fully stabilize. Instead, it oscillates between the two visual languages and places, the visual languages being the traditionally filmed footage and the photogrammetry scenes. And the sound contributes to a sense of dislocation. Sometimes you hear sounds from Addis Ababa while seeing sounds in Cleveland, or the reverse. So the viewer is never fully grounded in a single place. And the only stable place becomes the in-between itself. And through repetition, visual and sonic, I try to mimic the process of remembering. And then the Ethiopian coffee ceremony serves as a portal in the film, linking these fragmented spaces and temporalities. So through the juxtapositions of different types of media and the sonic dislocations, Ferenc builds on its original representational language of memory, and it embraces fragmentation, dislocation, and reconstruction as its material conditions. These are some more stills. So now I'm working on a documentary called Empress Aitu, which is the name of this restaurant. It's an attempt to eulogize the restaurant because it's now closed. And it was named after the actual Empress Aitu Betul, a powerful political strategist, and arguably one of the people who was most influential and instrumental in preserving Ethiopia's history as the only uncolonized African country. In the Treaty of Wuchale, this is around 1896, she noticed a discrepancy between the Amharic and the Italian versions in the translation. And she's the only one who said, no, don't sign this, Emperor Menelik, let's actually go to war. And they ended up going to war, and that was called the Battle of Adwa, in which Ethiopia was victorious. So my parents named the restaurant after her, and it really, as I was thinking about the formative memories of coming to understand identity and having a sense of pride and empowerment within that, to be at school in suburbs every day and then come back home to this restaurant named after this warrior woman who was not included in any of my textbooks, really had a profound, it left a mark on me and on my, basically like this counter archive that I was talking about earlier. I think the restaurant itself is an archive. And because it was a space of gathering and the only space of gathering for our community, only public space, I think it was it's been very important for me to honor and recognize this kind of unconventional form of archive. And it's in Cleveland, in the inner city of Cleveland. And I think the restaurant itself is in dialogue with the street that it's located on, which is called St. Clair. That's the name of our neighborhood. And, well, I'll get into that after. I should play this. I'll play a couple clips of this.
and go on, press the pound key. Message saved. Next message.
Oh, so sorry to hear that. We love that place. Thank you for your service. Bye.
To listen to this message, press 1. Message saved. Next message. Received at 5:51 p.m. on August 11th.
We love you so much. We are so sad you had to close. We're actually in shock because we were calling to make a reservation, so we wish you all the very best. We send so much love to you and your family. From Vanessa and Haley, we love your restaurant. Good luck.
To listen to this message saved. Next message.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I wish you, oh my God. You're the best Ethiopian restaurant in Ohio. I could tell. I wish there was some way we could keep you in focus.
To listen to this message, press 1. Message saved. Next message.
I'm so sad to hear that news. I hope you all are doing well. Sorry that you're closing. We really, really, really enjoyed coming to your establishment. Thank you so much for all your time that you gave to the restaurant and the delicious meals that you filled my belly with. So thank you.
To listen to this message, press 1. Message saved. Next message. Message saved. Next message.
Hi. Hi, my name is Ivory Green. I'm interested in the restaurant. Give me a call back at 216-302.
Message saved. Next message.
I'm too excited there. Very sad to hear the news. Wanted to make a res, but wish you well in your future endeavors. For scorekeeping purposes, this is Lester Armstrong and Seth Briskin.
To listen to this message, press 1. Message saved. Next message.
I'm so sorry to hear that. That makes me so sad. Oh, darn it. All right, well, I wish you well. Thank you for your years of delicious food. I appreciate it.
To listen to this message, press message saved. Next message.
Address. You can do this by visiting us.
Message saved. Next message.
Yes, I was calling to see if this villain is available for rent.
Message saved. Next message.
Hello, this is Sakada Sanmait or Dr. Robson. Salam na Choi, Danana Choi. Happy New Year. Happy Ethiopian New Year. And it's so sad that the restaurant closed, but you helped a lot of Ethiopians for the years through that restaurant. A lot of friends of mine, especially Ethiopians lady, they work in a restaurant, and they went to school, college. A lot of them, they're very productive and graduated. So there is no any regret. I love the time that we had. Thank you very much. Happy New Year, Dr. Robson and Sanite. You have a very Ethiopian good year now. It's time to have a good vacation on. It is time to relax. It is time to sleep. So you have a great day. Happy New Year.
To listen to this message, press 1. Message saved.
So if the restaurant is an archive. I think it's really, well, it becomes a kind of infrastructure for memory. And then within that, the coffee ceremony is this space that animates it and where that memory is transferred. And so when you think about Ethiopian restaurants across the entire diaspora in this way at a larger scale, not just as isolated sites, but as connected nodes, they start to form a kind of planetary network of memory, a distributed system of memory. Each one is grounded in a specific place, but connected through shared histories, rituals, and movements of people. It's about how memory travels, settles, and is reconstituted across distance, and how these spaces, often overlooked, become critical sites for holding and transmitting histories that might otherwise disappear. That's it. Thank you.
Good evening from Finland, and hope you're having a good day in New York. I want to bring to the discussion a very simple question, and it's a question that is puzzling in its awkwardness and its simplicity. How heavy is a city? What are the conditions through which we can imagine cohabitation? How does the materiality of the intensification of human endeavor transform what we consider the site of political engagement? And I would like to start by this quick overview of the project How Heavy is a City, which is driving the 7th Lisbon Architecture Triennale that just closed, is a shift, an inversion, like a torque that has completely transformed the way in which we consider space and the making of and the construction of the city. On the 1st of November, 1755, enormous catastrophe struck the capital of Lisbon and its empire. Lisbon at that time was the most powerful and rich of the European cities, and the disruption of the earthquake of the November of All Saints' Day in 1755 and the ensuing fires, and a few minutes later the tsunami that broke apart the entire fabric of the city, sparked also an incredibly vivid and contentious debates about the role of agency, about the notion of providence, about the notions of rationality, about the role of people versus the might of nature. And the ensuing Enlightenment debate shaped not only the European Enlightenment, but through a series of complex circulations, transformed modernity into an endeavor to secularize and to transform the structures of the inhabitation of humans on in the early stages of the colonial and imperial endeavor. So how heavy is a city? Is a question that tries to unfold an inversion of that moment. An inversion whereby technology, what saved us and what saves and protects us from the disruption of nature, is now the major mover of the earth. The major mover is somehow no longer coming from the ocean, coming from under us, but we are impacting the earth more than all the tectonic plate movements. So the simple question is somehow a question that highlights also and intercepts a new figure in the making. And the new figure is one that emerges with force, and it has, of course, a new magnitude, a new intensification, a planetary dimension of the new condition that we no longer can understand as stable, as a condition where to inhabit is to somehow safeguard against forces outside. It is our own action that is somehow fighting back at us and awakening the structures of the multi-centered processes of the Earth system. So the question how heavy is a city is in its first innocuous condition, one that might gear up answers in the names of material, number of tons of carbon dioxide, and the possibilities of thinking concrete. But the reality is that the conditions through which we are immediately confronted is that it's not clear ever what and we measure and how we measure. The figure and the ground condition are completely inverted, and the conditions through which to think where the city is and where the political endeavor is don't stop at the material contiguity or even at the conditions of human agency. They completely transform the relationship with the notion of acting on the world. What emerges is a new figure that we would like to name provisionally following Peter Haff, the technosphere. The technosphere is a system, it's a complex system that has emerged and has found its integration in the middle of the 20th century by combining and networking all the material and spaces, all the infrastructures that sustain humans. That means the technosphere is made up of all of us, plus everything that we eat. That means the domesticated animals and plants, plus the farmlands, plus the support systems that provision that, and the information and energy fluxes that combine that. And of course, the immaterial condition is driven by incredible push of energy. Largely, the technosphere, this new dimension of the city, what we used to call the city, that is no longer possible to intercept and articulate with clarity, but it's scattering across all existing spaces, is driven by the combustive propulsion of burning fossil fuels. And the burning of oil is what drives the complex system that is now similar in magnitude to the entire biosphere. The technosphere is a condition that is now of a magnitude similar to the entire living system. It has more energy consumption than net primary production, and its material basis, its physical dimension, is around 30 trillion tons. So the easy answer to the question how heavy is a city in the 21st century is 30 trillion tons. 30 trillion tons is a very big number. It has a dimension that is really difficult to fathom, difficult to understand in its magnitude and its intensity. The images that you might bring to your mind in thinking what it means in your experience, something of this magnitude, would be to imagine around 30 centimeters of rubble, similar to that of Gaza, everywhere. This is the magnitude of the technosphere. There is 30 centimeters of rubble everywhere. It is a dimension, for instance, that is in the sky in the form of debris. It's in the clouds in the form of augmented energy of the storms. It is in the land erosion. It's in the troll seas. It is in the pasture land. It's in the plantations, and of course carries the long growl of the extractive economies. It is characterized by a puzzlement. It puzzles architecture, it puzzles technology, because it is the condition through which our own actions are no longer directly connected to our intentionality. Our intentionality is now subsumed by the technosphere, a self-organizing component of the Earth system, a geological element whose rise really marks the beginning of the Anthropocene epoch in the middle of the 20th century. The inversion of agency is really what the project, How Heavy is the City, is about. The inversion of agency indicates that as every complex system, the technosphere operates through three rules. The first rule is that there is a rule of agency. The agency of the technosphere is to endeavor for its own survival. The second rule is that it needs energy to continue to pursue its survival and subsumes all its components for that rule one, to continue. And the third one is the inversion of the condition, where the system acts on every element in order to make sure that every action of the technosphere's components are for rule number 2 and rule number 1. So there's a complete inversion of agency, where we as humans are condemned, so to say, to pursue the functioning of the technosphere, even though the technosphere is detrimental to survival on the planet. And this is the real puzzlement and the baffling aspect of the technosphere. How we approach this in Lisbon is through the notion of Gedankenausstellung, and that is a thought exhibition, like a thought experiment, like a scientific experiment, where you don't yet have the sensibility or the capacity to become acquainted with possible implications of an intuition, a scientific intuition. So you imagine an experiment. In this case, the experiment is in the form of 3 exhibitions. And the first exhibition on How Heavy is the City invites a large coalition to think this simple question and to think what it means to operate in a condition of intensified material, energy, and information fluxes. And I would like to pay a little tribute, of course, to the most important planetary media, that is the name of this beautiful symposium that you've organized at Columbia, by looking at probably the most important and monumental of all the planetary media that we have. And that is the Mauna Loa Observatory of the Scripps Institution for Oceanography. Mauna Loa, of course, is always at risk, not only from the volcano, but it's at risk from funding, from the possibility of interrupting the most important continuous memory of human impact on our dear Earth. The latest reading on Monday is that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is 431.14 parts per million. And this is, of course, the major territorial marker. It's the area where we try to do not cross. And the daily constant rise of that combustion of the technosphere and leaving the debris in the sky and transforming all life forms to the point that we are facing a major extinction, a mass extinction of all life on the planet, is of course the condition that has been seen by many also as a condition of progress, as a condition that enables and articulates after 1755 the development of modernity, better hospitals, better transport system, better food system, better houses, better conditions of life for many, and accompanied with that, of course, an incredible explosion of human population. Human population then drives further energy consumption and so on. So at some point, this is seen by many as the notion of progress and the notion of emancipation, as the notion of liberty, whereby you cannot be free without energy. And the image, of course, is now turning into an image of the bads, not of the goods, but of the bads, to follow Ulrich Beck's notion of a cosmopolitan vision. And if we look back at 10,000 years ago, we see the stability of the Holocene epoch interrupted by the great acceleration that brings us with the formation of the technosphere as a synchronous global paradigm into a new geological epoch. And if you're interested, maybe you want to go back 800,000 years ago, and you can see the interglacial periods with the ebb and flow of the CO2 in the atmosphere, and the spike in the last 70 years, growing. And the question, of course, is whether that impulse of the technosphere will be able to transform at the planetary in a condition that is bringing it towards complete annihilation of the biosphere, or whether somehow it will stabilize through and not reach a tipping point of its own internal dynamics. The same curve, of course, reverberates, and with the modernity effort of gathering information about industrialization. For instance, this is a diagram of Buckminster Fuller indicating the Industrial Revolution discovery of the chemical elements. But the possibilities of thinking this moment of inversion of agency bring us, for instance, to calibrate what we mean by what is the city, what is the space of political engagement and conviviality. Is it only in the densely inhabited part, or is it in the outer reach of the boreal forest in Athabasca? Is the sulfur extracted from the tar sand the condition which is one of the major conditions for producing ammonia, and out of that all the structures of provision of agricultural fertilizers, something that we just want to eliminate? This is the difficulty. We are the technosphere, we are the major component of it, but we're not the driver. We only continue in its constant in sustainment. The other dimension of planetary media, of course, is the modeling, the complex modeling and the vast machine of Paul Edwards' reading that calibrates and reshapes all the conditions through which we can imagine a technological intervention. It's no longer that we observe, we measure, and then we act, but the actions are already modeled in a cybernetic loop into the complex networks of data provision of our contemporary life, so that it's almost impossible to disentangle one perception of the planet from the action on the planet. And this is what characterizes also another dimension of the difficulty of thinking how heavy is a city, that is the distinction between the politic and the science, between the world as it could be, the imagination, the possibility of engaging with life in a different way, versus the world as it is, the world given by the science. And that distinction is now completely inverted and indistinguishable. The technosphere, of course, is seen by many as a condition to be rejected, as a condition that we need to lay back. But it is also the condition through that makes life possible. There's a very clear situation where without the provisions of food, the provisions of energy, the provision of information, humanity will very quickly decay to numbers well below those of the Stone Age, of recent infamous memory. The condition of construction of modernity that enables emancipation, that enables the possibilities of providing food for people, are also what characterizes the technosphere. And the exhibition in Lisbon is thought as a series of screens where the multiple dimensions of thinking, the relationship between the city and its fluxes, are brought to a situation where you have a sort of a field of contradictory elements and introductory questions, multiplying the simple question that starts with the input by Ann-Sofi and myself. The question of how to measure is characterized by Vladimir Joler and Kate Crawford in their beautiful Calculating Empires, and the condition through which those technologies are completely engrowled and enmeshed and connected to an idea of a continuous space that we can articulate technologically, is also what is at the center of the second exhibition, which is called Spectres, the spectral dimension of the technosphere, which on one side looks at imaginal technologies that characterize the possibilities of achieving the knowledge of the Anthropocene and the technosphere rise, and at the same time are the same technologies that allow the processes that have underpinned the rise of the technosphere. So this is a very complex situation where we can only see the Anthropocene from the technologies that have enabled the Anthropocene. It's a condition that is not possible to articulate outside of modernity, in spite of the fact that the challenge of the Anthropocene notion by Paul Crutzen brings about an entire revision of which knowledges and how to know. It is also very clear that no one has ever faced the Anthropocene. So we are somehow idea of a man's unaided audible spaces versus the intensified technological dimensions that where the seeing and the listening are expanded into the entire electromagnetic field. So the point is that by thinking planetary media, we are thinking that the very spheres, like the magnetic field of the Earth, is now completely transformed by technological means in order to sense the Earth and become sensitive to its disruptions. And some think that it's also the means through which you can continue and pursue more of the technological disruption. The conditions, of course, of the extractive bring about another dimension of as another spectral dimension, and that is that we live in spaces that are not the same space that we live from. The ghost acreages of colonialism and contemporary practices of interconnected planetary supply system, and always marked with a certification of origin, a certification of constantly being on the move and in the hold, a sort of condition of empire on a boost, is somehow then taken aback from the fact that all deeds of humanity, all deeds of property or infrastructures are snatched back by the resurgent Earth, by the resurgent seas, the rising seas of we are only in the early stages of the new inundation that is gonna be swiping away land that is now covered by around 1 billion people, and in the low-lying areas, and affecting larger and larger groups. And the conditions of thinking this situation are not possible to be imagined and articulated without the constant attention to the use of the same laser scanning, satellite imagery, orbital scanning, modeling that characterize the extraction. So there's a sense that the new figure in the making that is the contemporary city is only possible to perceive in retrospect, or in a model. It's very difficult to somehow think of it as a space that one can inhabit, that one can be in, except that there is no outside. There is no possibility of a condition of illusion from the contemporary technosphere. This Armin Linke looking at the precision scanning of the charred wreck of Notre Dame de Paris after the disastrous fire. And in order to reconstruct the cathedral in Paris, an entire digital space had been recalibrated in order to augment the capacity of understanding the knowledges that somehow over the centuries went lost on how to build oak roofs, where are the woodlands from, where are the structures from. And the conditions that we are seeing here is, again, one of inversion of agency, a condition where images are not produced in order to simply document, but they produce and they are active, they are conditioning these structures. So the question of specters is one of constant echoes and feedback and the noise, and it's difficult to somehow get hold of this structure. In a similar way, the conditions of contemporary urbanization, the contemporary structures of life tend to be thought always from the point of view of humans. And in this case, Dorsa, a young group of architects from Zurich, indicate how cars along the motorways of Europe have become the pollinators of a neobiota, a new garden that extends along the interstices of the infrastructure, sort of invasive species that shapes contemporary life. And they call this the continuous garden of contemporary Europe, the non-stop garden. And this is a space, again, that is only visible through a side view, a side glance into the structures of contemporary city. The work of Jeff Manogue and John Becker, New Yorker, investigates, on the contrary, the possibility of thinking the perception becoming sensitive through the most long and the longest of times, the times of the cosmos, the time of the cosmic rays that permeate every aspect of our physical life. And they envisage this sort of narrative where you will be seeing the city from below, peering through the long exposure of the mammography across the city in order to detect the fleeting passing of time in a house, looking up at the sky above it. And this is another example, the work of Maximilian Schob, that investigates how contemporary architecture is very close to rethinking its structures of presentation and the recalibration of geometries by looking at light as a condition of inhabitation and disruption. And there's a piece about using complex algorithms to detect the scars of deforestation in Scandinavia. The exhibition Spectres brought us from the work of Patti Smith and Soundwalk Collective to investigate really what it means to think agency at a time of complete planetary disruption and upheaval. And the third exhibition, the concluding one, the concluding aspect of the question, how heavy is the city, is called Lighter, and it indicates more light, in the sense that we need less disruption caused by the burning of petroleum, the acquiring of fossil fuels, and more intensification of the biosphere, the photosynthesis. At the moment, this narrative is only warped. It's completely covered by the only two narratives that are present in public discourse at the moment about the planetary. The first one is one of retreat and vindication and also of accusation towards the current state of the world, and somehow to think that we can do less, that we can step back and somehow there will be a recovery. It is a narrative that is mired with notions of guilt, the notions of impossibility of action. And the second is as usual business, or even more business than usual, thinking that the technosphere might find in a very quick time the capacity to somehow change its structures. Now, the condition is quite simple, that we need more light, and because of a very basic thermodynamic situation. If you have a system like the technosphere that is using energy and is not recycling, it's just leaving behind a huge amount of debris, like 30 trillion tons that I've indicated, any secondary school students will know that if you want to add to that system a condition of capacity of recycling, you need to add energy, not retreat, not withdraw, but we need to think a condition where we can transform the ways in which violent ways in which the technosphere and its rise are interrupting every aspect of life and individual, psychic and collective and political dimensions. What we need is a situation that can learn from the biosphere, where the entire material, energy, and information system and fluxes constantly are recycling because they have a constant input of sunlight, of more light. And we need to learn how to concentrate our capacity to acquire a integrated dimension towards living in a sustainable way within the complex Earth system. And maybe this is another dimension of what is a planetary media. It's probably James Lovelock's notion of the self-regulating, or a system that somehow manages within the constraints to find its own forms and its own structures of regulation. Again, an indication of how this image is a déjà vu. It's a déjà vu, for instance, again, Buckminster Fuller's idea of an expanding technosphere in the early 60s. Light is an exhibition that has at its center the possibility of thinking the transformation of the biosphere, the transformation of photosynthesis, in the case of Alexander Daisy Ginsberg, and this incredible stained glass piece that indicates the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, or maybe the sister of the great-grandmother of all photosynthetic beings on the planet, and this image of the fossil of the first photosynthetic dimension. The exhibition is thought as a condition where you're constantly engaged with notions of disruption, of rearticulation, self-regulation, an imaginary of orders that are constantly eluding the capacity of humans to control them, and at the same time embedded in a technological dimension of possibility of understanding the noise, the disruption, like in the case of Lumi by Edouard, by Gilverzier and Yusuf Parika, that indicate the possibility of restoring the albedo by erasing human action and ending up disrupting all landscapes in order to maintain artificial intelligence. So the question I wanted to pose tonight in this beautiful and amazing seminar that you've put together is a simple one, one that we hope instigates further discussions and further articulation about how to live together, what it means to be in a city, what it means to be citizens, and how to think without ever understanding that there is a possibility of unifying this beautiful four-letter word that is the marker of the contemporary difficulties of thinking being together. And tonight I'm joining you from Finland remotely, and I'm sorry that the disruption in Iran has caused us difficulty in traveling to be there with you in New York in person. Ann-Sofi sends best greetings, and I wanted to thank really the amazing work done by all of you at Columbia, in particular Emmeline and Xiaoqi, and the behind-the-scenes work of the AV department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John.
Wow, thank you. That was so wonderful. Thank you, Emmeline, for inviting me to respond, and thank you, Macarena, John, and Ainslee for the presentations that I will try and do justice to in the couple of minutes I have. So I was thinking, watching your presentations, I was thinking that there's, well, all three presentations have a kind of orientation, obviously, to the planetary, but also to kind of history, and it's trying to negotiate, that relationship between the body and, on the one hand, this kind of question of how to think in the planetary way, but also this other question of how to think historically in terms of, particularly considering that history is largely told through a set of archives that encode certain forms of power that you can't really fully undo by writing those histories, but like the histories that you write always continuously, I wouldn't say reproduce, but definitely have traces of those forms of power within them. Okay, so, right, let me just find my notes. Okay, so from on the side of this, question of the planetary, it seems to me that there's a way in which there's a question in, especially when I saw the final image of Macarena's presentation, was it the last one, but the one where, you're in the ocean and you see the refrigerator door go by, which is that you kind of, the way to get to the planet is to get into the body, so you are sort of, all of these things assimilate into yourself. And then, Ainslee, when I was looking at your presentation, I was thinking about the restaurant as a place that nourishes people. And so there's been this long, I don't know how many decades the restaurant was open for, but that people have been being fed. And so this food is going into their bodies, and these bodies are then going across the world. And so there's a material trace going from that infrastructural center out into the world, even as, in Macarena's paper, you have all of these objects that, so there I was thinking about how the ocean is used as a sink, as a way to think about a place where things can go and never have to return, but of course they always return, and they return into our bodies. And so that was one way in which I was thinking about how these two papers were imagining this relationship to the planet through a kind of body and a body politic, because all of these things also go and then form worlds. So for example, to have a restaurant, you also have to be able to import food. You have to be able to bring certain kinds of ingredients in. You have to be able to develop new techniques to produce the kinds of food that you would have produced elsewhere. And so there's all of these ways that so much has to be built around the possibility of assimilating into one's body and taking those bodies out into the world. The thing about its relationship with history then, on the other hand, is that at the same time, there's a metabolic process ongoing which renders that history unreadable. So there's an illegibility of this archive of what is assimilated into the body, precisely because it is metabolized. It's not, and history relies so much on a kind of citational regime. And so how do you cite, like if you have a thought or you have an idea, how do you cite the meal that you ate 10 years ago that, you know, led to whatever series of things? You can't do that. That's lost, but it's not lost. And I think that's the point you're making about memory and material, that there's a kind of possibility to tell not history, but some kind of heresy. What a great word, right? Like that there's something blasphemous about being able to say something without the possibility of citing it because of whatever process has undergone to make that citational regime, which is in itself a regime of colonial power, impossible to rely on anymore. And yet we must rely on stories. And I mean, Rosa Luxemburg's body, of course, is the thing that you cannot use the ocean or the canal or the water as a sink. It will come back. But it will come back in a way that's horrible. You know, this is a horrible violence that was done to not just to her first and foremost, but also to the communist movement. Okay, so and then that kind of made me think about John's presentation about where he said that one of the most tantalizing lines, I think, for me, that the conditions of the Anthropocene can only be read by tools that have been produced by the conditions that have produced the Anthropocene. And right? And yes, I know that. And so my question over there was, can we then refuse to read it? Can we then refuse to what kind of a refusal can we make in that context? Especially because understanding it has not helped us change it. Understanding the planetary destruction has not made a single lick of a difference in actually addressing it. In fact, it is constantly instrumentalized into, you know, techno fixes that only make things more kind of what was the word? Acceleration. You know, more acceleration. And so, how the question, which is sort of not an easy question to answer, so I would rather say that your work is asking that question than I am asking you that question, is this metabolic process that is in a way a refusal to engage the tools that produce the very conditions that you're trying to imagine and understand. And that is my response.
Is this on? Okay. Okay. Thank you all so much for your presentations. So beautiful to engage with. On Macarena's, when you bring up this idea of decomposition and metabolism, and to riff off of Ateya on this question about metabolism and refusal, I was thinking about failure. And with regard to representation, I want to maybe backtrack to connect all these three presentations, which is when you brought up Jane Kaizen's work, which is an active montage, right? So we're overlaying and we're interrupting a kind of continuity or a kind of history, a dominant history that's told. And I want to link that to Han Gang's recent novel that was published in English, We Do Not Part, which is about the same Jeju uprising and massacre. And in that novel, nothing really happens per se, but she's haunted by spectral memories embedded within the landscape. And so essentially she's unable to perform a kind of normative life in that novel. And I'm thinking through the forms of representation, particularly Ainslee in your work, that the point cloud is so fascinating as a form of representation, because there's these moments you're saying, I programmed in, I forget how you say, like an explosion or something, or maybe that's not the right word, yes? And that explosion you're talking about reminded me of the flicker, Macarena, that you brought up. And I was thinking of like a spectral flicker that interrupts a smoothness or continuity. It's interesting to think of the point cloud as and aesthetics of the point cloud, which is such a beautiful way to think through memory, that it's not continuous, it's fragmented. When you're immersed in it, you actually don't really see the immediate thing around you, right? So you're constantly confronted with something that is not, it's constantly revealing its artificiality in a way, or constructedness. And I was thinking that in the point cloud, there's a refusal of the surface as something smooth and continuous. And I think about the smoothness really of capitalism, which is that it your point cloud films refuse to be submerged in a kind of hegemonic narrative of surface. So I feel like with Jane Kaizen's work of the montage, also the juxtaposition with the shamanic, the morning dirge, that there's this constant refusal to say this is the way that a history should be told, where there's an interruption. And to think through with territorial agency, I really love the idea of the specter, the spectral, that there's these moments that we're only a certain small portion of the spectrum, and there's a kind of eruption within that we're unable to sense. So this inability for us to sense something, and referencing also territorial agency's other work, that I was struck by the note you had made about algorithms to detect certain scars on the landscape, because I know with spectral imaging, it's actually exceedingly difficult to find these traces or witness or evidentiary cause. So in a way, there's again, a way you have to interrupt what seems to be normative images to reveal something. Okay, thank you.
Hey, thank you everybody. Has been amazing. Thank you, Ameline. I find it very productive to think of planetary not as a totality, but also as a condition that is partial, mediated, and situated. And so across the three presentations, what emerges is not only a question of how we represent the environment, but how representation itself becomes a site of tension between visibility and invisibility, abstraction and situatedness, image and material. And so the three practices, I think, resist the notion of neutral image. And so I think that's also that Amelie and our audience is mainly consists of students that are also taking her sequence, and how she's curating the sequence. Representation is something that actively constructs relations, whether by mapping complex infrastructures, foregrounded, submerged perspectives, or operating through sensory and material registers in the case of Ainslee. So one question that I think raises in both the students and Ameline's and in a School of Architecture is where does representation become from descriptive to when it does begin to act, no? And so if we're in this crisis of representation, how we do kind of turn it into something that could be also acting, no? Also, something that was spoken this morning is around scale, no? And also Ameline was stating that in the first question, no? And so there's also this representation from operation is also as I understand it, tied on how practices are move across scales from the planetary to the situated and back again. No, so John was talking about the technosphere, no, moving from mapping large-scale infrastructures, energy systems, territories, oceans, to also forms of practice that are embodied, material, and locally grounded, as May Stevens paintings, or these systems of distributed systems of memory that Ainslee was talking about. And so how can situated practices feed back on how those larger systems are understood, represented, or even redefined, no? And yeah, also something that was very interesting to me, and I think you already talked about this point cloud, and also you, Ateya, were talking about how John was saying that, yeah, how the representation systems that produce the Anthropocene are the ones that represent the Anthropocene, and how this kind of is like kind of like so strange, no? And so how can, for instance, Ainslee, this kind of point cloud, which is so powerful and so on, and it's highly complex, is also a kind of cinematographic, Hollywood-like, something like that. How this kind of representational techniques and the cultural regimes that are often associated with do not neutralize the critical and political dimensions of our work, and but also on the other side, how, for instance, when Macarena looks into submerged perspectives, how, as a school of architecture, avoid turning, like I'm just thinking about studios and so on. In our scale of action, how do we avoid turning them into aesthetic categories for contemporary cultural production? No? Yeah, we're always navigating between these transcalar, as the dean would say, questions and forms of representation and action and political action. I don't know.
Thanks to our respondents. I'd love to hear what our speakers from this session have to respond and think with. If you have any follow-up comments.
I love all those comments. Thank you. That was a lot and brilliant. I mean, I think this idea of contingency of representation, maybe more than crisis of representation, because it seems to me that we think a lot at the Elemental Media Lab with Denise Freire de Silva's idea of implicancies, you know, in the sense that we are all implicated in this kind of networked forms of representation. And the reason I was thinking with something like spectral imagery, which you brought up initially, I think in your talk, thinking of ghosted and haunted landscapes, or the ghost and monsters of the Anthropocene, if you will, the ways in which spectral imagery itself, you know, it's like the past that continues to impress itself on the present. And it's something that is not just used in studios, but across indigenous groups. And I was recently in conversation with Basil Abbas and Ran Aburame, which have they have that beautiful work, the Whitney Biennial. Have people seen that? If not, go down, see it. It's incredible. Until We Became Fire and Fire Us. Forms of haunting. And that work has a lot of spectrality in it. And that work they made in part in relationship to seeing the work of Mapuche Francisco Huichaqueo, who uses spectrality in a very kind of lo-fi way in their work, where the kind of pine trees and pine plantations take over the kind of ancestral trees of Walmapu territory. And so in the same way, upon Palestinian territory, the pine tree has been used as a form of settler colonialism, right? And so they actually turn that into the pine tree as spectral imagery. All to say, this kind of learning that goes across, it's not just interplanetary, you know, learning through institutions, but there's a kind of indigenous learning system as well around spectrality that I think is really important to bring up. Okay, that's just a response to your beautiful comments, and maybe I'll leave it there and pass it to you to say more about embodied ways of knowing and memory.
Thank you for those responses. Super interesting. As I think more about refusal and refusing what metabolizes, well, I think you also kind of answered that in speaking to the aesthetic of the point clouds themselves and their brokenness as refusing that polished, perfect version of kind of access to the memories that I didn't have, or the representations of those memories. So when I was making Ferenc, the VR experience, I was attempting to excise this white gaze that I felt that I had metabolized. And in order to do that, I thought I attempted to not explain things. I attempted to only have contextual information present in the story. But in the end, I found that it was so kind of ingrained, this like justifying my experience was so ingrained in my psyche that I do actually look back on that experience and think that, no, that's still a work in progress, this excising of the gaze. And I think that's why in the next piece, Ferenc the film, I had no dialogue in that. And I thought, okay, removing this speaking about my experience from the narrative would remove this. And so that's why then I was interested in intentionally further dislocating the viewer between space and time, but still situating them in this liminal space. And now in the documentary, that's still in progress, but I'm thinking about those techniques of refusal within that as well.
Thank you very much for that feedback. It's really impressive to hear your thoughts. A few notes about the possibilities of avoiding technology, or the possibility of thinking from the outside. I think that one of the elements that emerges in our work is that technology is always to be considered as a cosmopolitical dimension. And within it, in that making of multiplicity, one can never reduce technology into any kind of hegemonic notion of reason. And there's always, in the interstices, in the complex in-betweens of technology and the technological media, a reasonable but also contested political dimension. So my point is not to refuse technology, not to avoid it, but to engage with it as a process, as a complex new engagement with the conditions that sustain us, understanding also the passions that drive it, and refusing the only condition that needs really to refuse is the disruptive condition that technology brings about it. The project that we need to engage with in order to remain is to think how to be at peace, how to organize a peace, not simply by moving away, but engaging in a complex possibility of thinking that technology can only be explained and articulated in its choices in the presence of those who will face its consequences. So there's the claim of the beautiful little word city is really there to bring together a political dimension towards this technological. So I thank you very much for your intuition about the difficulties of being entrapped in the technological world, but I would suggest not to denounce it, but to engage with it as a political, that means as an architectural condition that needs to transform the polis, the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And I know this is so we're about to go into kind of hearing what students think. I think that's super important, and we have this amazing group of respondents for this half. But I also really wanted to make it a conversation, or hopefully speakers from the first session, if you have any kind of thoughts you want to kind of maybe, if it's even just a passing few words. I'm just curious if any of you have something to bring in here. We could keep folding the concepts in, and I think once we maybe hear from students, and maybe we can do these final comments together. But Okay, our formidable students, please.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Something that stood out for me was from Ainslee's presentation. You mentioned how memory is inaccessible in both spatially and temporally, and I was thinking of where we are on the spectrum of time and space, which I think also lends itself to all of these plays on words that have been mentioned in terms of spectral archives and specters and so on. But I was thinking about the point clouds as both a media artifact of like literally transcoding data from one format to the other, but also how the very fragmented nature is an effect of moving it across space that is not smooth and is textured, and how it accounts for the fact that things have happened in both time and space since the original point of capture, and how they're sort of picking up on that. And also, I was thinking about loss, both in terms of its computational definition, in terms of like the digital artifact, but also as like a very like emotional and poetic result of this sort of haunting.
Hello, thank you all for your presentations. Again, all very similar to this morning. I'm completely blown away by everything everyone has presented. Macarena, I think something that I really grabbed onto was this idea of how, and I might be like going off verbatim, but how this monocultural design of Western episteme fails to encapsulate sort of the pluriversal world that is present in indigenous decolonial thought as a consequence of, I think as you put it, a severing of the pluriversal world. And so I think a question that I'm sort of grappling with after watching these presentations is how we sort of reincorporate or revitalize or reinstantiate this pluriverse, which again has been so heavily embedded in non-Western modes of thinking within our own work. And I kind of like how you, I think I mentioned it earlier about this idea of like grounding ourselves back into the land. And I think someone mentioned it on this panel about how you, by going into the water, is like literally connecting your body to the planet, and thus like embracing the ground that way and grounding yourself in that regard, which I found very interesting. And then I also just liked your other point about sort of framing, or this framing of how we can highlight or elucidate the memory of the non-human within our work. So again, to speak of this like pluriverse.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. It was such a joy to not only see your work, but also listen to you talk about it. I think in summary, like today was a very confident reminder that whenever we try to approach things with like 100% totality, 100% certainty, that's kind of already missing the point. That's already kind of a failure in it of itself. And to talk with like the vocabulary of the algorithm of technology with binaries of right and wrong and yes or no, that's a fault that we have currently. It's reductive, I think. And it's in the moments of imprecision or doing something wrong intentionally, I think that's when something real is created. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much again. I think in all of the work that we've seen today, the notion of gaze has been really present, as well as the resolution of that gaze, both like temporally, emotionally, and compositionally. I think in Macarena's work, the notion of the sea as a witness I thought was really beautiful and powerful, and this sort of idea of a submerged gaze. And Ainslee, the gaze is obviously so clear as well. And being able to kind of sit in your memory and listen to these voicemails, I think was really powerful. And the sort of resolution of the gaze as a set of points. And John, the question of heaviness and our gaze being under the city, I think also has a really like potent way of allowing us to think about weight. I'm also interested in, again, in the resolution of that. Like we have a figure of 31 trillion tons, which is such a clean number. And I'm interested, in what forms of agency does both resolution and gaze offer us in producing these counter forms of knowledge? Counter palimpsest is the idea that you mentioned, Macarena, counter archives and counter discourses and ways of thinking.
So I wanted to return to the question of narrative and then also subverting stability, and then narrative also as narration. And I latched onto this idea initially while listening to your presentation, Ainslee, but in looking back, I can see how all of the speakers today have engaged with that idea of narrative building. And then Ainslee, you specifically mentioned the concept of the unreliable narrator, and I think you referred to yourself as an unreliable narrator, relying on secondhand accounts, the things that you have called the inaccessible lineage and the inaccessibility of lineage and descent. But I think that that can even go further beyond also just secondhand information to also third-hand experiences and thinking about how that transmission of lineage happens over time and through different media. But then also on that question of the unreliable narrator, in the way that all of these projects have started subverting stability, I'm starting to wonder if there even is such a thing as a reliable narrator. And if you think about that, you know, that can obviously snowball, but I don't know, that's just where I landed. I was like, is there ever a reliable narrator? And especially when you think about what many of you who have already mentioned in responding, is that many of the tools that we use to narrate and document were produced by the technosphere and the Anthropocene and all of these kind of worlds that we're actually trying to work against. So I'm curious to hear more about that. And in an effort to make this more of a conversation, Amelin, I also wanted to think about the notion of the point cloud that has been coming up and the way that here it has been subverted. It's been used to refuse the smoothing of space and textures and et cetera. But I wonder if maybe it still is smoothing time. So, like for example, I've seen that now many architecture firms, and this is from firsthand experience, they're using point clouds to speed up the way they make as-built drawings. So they go, they record an environment, and it saves on their man hours instead of going and really using a tape measure to document the space and notice different things. And as has become clear in many of these projects, the point cloud misses a lot of things. So then when you condense a space into a point cloud and you say that that is the as-built, it is reality, then maybe there is still a smoothing of time that's happening, even though the space is not being smoothened. But sorry, a bit of a long response, but thank you.
I wanted to say thank you again. Yeah, the presentations today have been incredible. I am like sort of stuck on both Ainslee and Macarena, both of you beginning with language, like specifically definitions and thinking through grammar and poetics, Macarena, and how you both kind of speak about language as something highly flexible, but also extremely specific. Ainslee, I think you said that you are trying to also even stop the stabilization of memory, and that being also referred to something through the language. And even going back to sort of the title of the symposium, media is something that destabilizing memory in this context, but media also something as a sort of happening in all of these conversations today, not necessarily a specific medium or object. And Macarena was also just sort of stuck on what you had said as dwelling as an eco-queer practice and the sort of witness that happens. And that relation to the glitter as an archive of shine, what does the shine remember? That kind of keeps on coming back to the idea that this is a sort of time-sensitive affect, that all the sort of projects and practices we've seen today are not necessarily thinking through media as object or artifact, or as something really constrained, but something that is really constant. And yeah, I really enjoyed everyone sort of dwelling literally on that.
Hello, thank you. I'm kind of mainly awestruck by the representational strategies that you all deploy. Macarena talking about the sort of submerged perspective and the glitter, and then Ainslee sort of a point cloud. But I almost saw it as more like polka dots kind of like being sprinkled or sort of throughout like the surface. And then John, I was kind of struggling with a bit, but until the end when he was kind of showing these spectered, sort of ghostly kind of new ways for which to kind of configure and understand sort of urbanism in relation to kind of this question of how heavy a city is. And all of them kind of made me sort of appreciate, I think I saw like the sort of forms of how they kind of outputted whatever the work is, whatever that means, that it's sort of something not simply to be seen or sort of received, but that you are all quite literally a part of the drawings, and that the information there's a sort of palimpsensual sort of like richness there where I can see quite all of your sort of personalities inlaid within the work. And kind of also this question of how we kind of can create new forms for which to kind of help us understand the sort of world that we're living in its totality. Sort of John is sort of pointing at this fact that, it's, the sort of, it's just like so much to kind of intake and to understand and to comprehend. And I really appreciate this sort of newfoundness of how you're utilizing these sort of tools for which to help yourself sort of explain the world, I guess, to yourself in a way, which I found this quite powerful. And also maybe this question of these are processes that were intended, or if the sort of machine, the sort of software, the process sort of kicked out something that you just sort of took in as a part of your own sort of artistic process and kind of ran with it and made it a part of your sort of practice is these are all sort of things I'm thinking about mainly. So, yeah, thank you.
Shout out to the students. We've been listening, by the way. So, thank you. Great response. Yeah, I just really want this space to be open for, as we've been calling this space the living room, and I really do value this kind of interchange. I feel like it's a rare moment in a time like this where it's hard to sit down and linger in the uncertainties of the present and of the past and of the future. I think this is kind of the temporality that keeps coming back in the haunting and a recurring kind of return to these questions that we constantly find ourselves embroiled in. Architecture, of course, being a kind of situated site of media, of contestation, of physical entanglement. So I really think, I have no script. I feel like the brilliance has been unleashed into the room, and I want to steward that. So if anyone would like to respond and kind of maybe reflect. I feel like we're in potentially like we have, to use Gökçe's word of accumulation rather than transition. I feel like we've flipped a lot of concepts for ourselves today, and we've done some accumulation work, and not to distill, because I don't think this is the moment where we give you the takeaways and the key points, but I think it's something about steeping in this moment. And I'm curious what we all now think of the Planetary after we've completely maybe dispensed with it.
I'm going to pick up on your water metaphors, references. But I think, first of all, I loved all the presentations from the second half, and I think the student comments were really spot on. In hearing the responses or the comments, I was kind of contemplating or questioning how to juggle this refusal of legibility that is coming up against the kind of more disciplinary impulse to make the invisible visible. Because I think that's also something that we always talk about in architectural representation. So I'm juggling with those two things, but then I think perhaps a more helpful reference is through water and with Macarena's invitation to consider the unstable sea edge as maybe a model that we can move towards, that instability is perhaps not an enemy but a friend in this condition. That maybe embracing the instability of the world that we live in is about kind of understanding our complicity, but also, let's say, immersing ourselves, submerging ourselves in each other, in kind of dissolving the smoothness of identifying us as one versus, let's say, this flickering back and forth between the self and, let's say, the greater constituency, right? And not to say the whole, because we are still kind of maybe working within partiality, but the kind of, maybe that metaphor of bodies of water, the unstable edge, is an invitation for all of us to kind of, you know, work within different agencies, or to kind of switch on and off different ideas of the self and who we belong to, where we work in and within, right? Yeah. Thank you for that inspiration.
I have a random thought. Ainslee, you had brought up that the photogrammetry is really it's very hard to render windows, reflections, mirrors, perhaps bodies of water at certain angles. And I'm struck by this, wow, where was I going with that? The flicker. I think this notion of the flicker is something, you were talking about an aesthetics of glitter, and we're talking about a flicker and an oscillation, and it's interesting to me that the photogrammetry technology we imagine to be able to capture and the errors within it, it flickers the moment it comes up against a certain type of surface. And it seems that flicker is whatever, I was thinking of like this Walter Benjaminian moment of like, oh, the memory that it suffuses through time, a kind of moment of revolution. Okay, that was it.
I mean, I really like this idea. Thank you to the students. I mean, those were just brilliant comments on the flight. And I was thinking with John's kind of rubble, you know, and the way in which the technosphere is this kind of space of rubble, and then using Gaza to kind of measure the technosphere, but maybe the inverse is true, that, or they're more connected, right, in ways that it's not about a measurement, but it is the very rubble of the technosphere that produces the kind of paradigm of war and genocide. And so I think that that's one aspect, and the fact that people are picking up on this flickering in and out, or this way in which the instabilities, I mean, this is something, you know, we are in a kind of totalizing paradigm. That paradigm would like us to believe it's totalizing. There are these refusals, those openings, these frictions, fractures in the matrix. But I think I really take away from Hoteria studies, kind of a trans of color approach, which is Eddie Alvarez and communities have been talking about this, that what it means to kind of look for the sequin in the rubble, you know? And so that to me seems like maybe that's what I'm trying to kind of sort through in this kind of waterscape, and what you're talking about, the rubble is everywhere. And so what are those sequins that we can begin to piece together into the communal space of the diasporic restaurant, where I just think that's so beautiful how that restaurant, the memory, it's not a haunting, it's a communal autonomous space that someone created to bring a kind of brokenness back together again in a space of diaspora. And that is so powerful. That is what I think Jane Jin is also, Kaizen is also connecting. And so yeah, just to leave us a little bit with that sequin in the rubble idea.
Thank you to the students as well. I don't even know where to start. But in general, I think, yes, this like slippage between binaries of right and wrong, or legibility and illegibility, is really interesting. And that was what I was grappling with in terms of creating this archive of 3D scans, and why I even needed to create that in the first place. I remember Googling at the time that I was making Faranj. I was just Googling Ethiopia on Google Maps, and then trying to zoom in on my mom's hometown. and other places. And yeah, you can't, there are places where you can't do street view. And this conversation is reminding me of that kind of the duality of how it was, it's frustrating. It was inaccessible. It was illegible to me. But at the same time, I felt like, oh, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this means that we're less surveilled. I don't know. But I think there's a level of protection of also not being as legible or accessible. So I find myself situated between the two.
Yeah, thank you for the questions and the responses. Something that has been kind of sticking out in my mind is something that one of you mentioned in the last session about the kind of biases embedded in the media or the technologies or the tools that we're using. I mean, I think that John was talking about the tools we use. They come from the technospheric apparatuses of coloniality and power that we find ways somehow of, I don't know, maybe delighting in or trying to work within the gaps in those systems, be it a point cloud that we can use with our phone or another system. I think because we know sort of what needs to happen in the world in a way to stop some of these problems, but we have no power in our minds to do it. We have to use these tools and try to undermine them or figure out new ways to mobilize them. And there's something about that feels like, given the fact that at least I feel quite privileged generally in my life to be here, and so there's a moment in which I feel a guilt of the kind of comfort that I find in coming together and talking about the fact that we can find moments of joy in the glitter and these fragmentary lives of our media. And I think that part of what we do when we get together like this, which I love, is finding ways to figure out how we're finding comfort in these moments and projecting them in new ways. But a lot of it always comes back to that root of the tools that we use become the agents that we have to describe the world. And so I think that question does come to the root of it, because they're really powerful things that are very difficult to actually undermine, right? And we end up in, I think what I find somewhat comforting is actual sort of striations or tracks that we share. And somehow I think that keeps proving more powerful to me as I keep making things with these tools. So I don't know if that registers or means anything, but it's something I've been feeling today.
I love this sort of the call for the glitter and the rubble and the sort of and unfortunately it made me think of like a different panel I was on recently, where people from people who had recently returned to Syria after the civil war were talking about how in the rubble there was nothing. There was, everything had already been taken, and there was only dust, and there was nothing to recover. And so in a way it's sort of made me think of like all the, I mean, I think in your presentation you mentioned something about how there's no end to war. Sometimes there's a pause where we're between wars, but war is the sort of the ultimate condition that structures the sort of the experiences that we're going through. And I guess maybe in this moment it's even more true than ever. And so so I wondered, like, what would be some ways to sort of recreate that glitter or find that if it's not there to be found, how do you sort of generate that? How do you create that moment? And in some ways, I think that was the war was somehow in the background in all the presentations that we heard, even though maybe it didn't explicitly talk about it. So appreciate the sort of the opportunity to come together in this, in this political context to openly speak about some of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, I have my assignment, so I'm standing between all of us and our reception. So, no, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, but I think maybe where my mind has been going has been Stacey Alimo's work and just a lot of the, like Macarena's, plunge into the polluted water is really making me think of this idea of transcorporeality that Alimo has and the idea of exposure. And so what I'm kind of gathering at the end here in terms of planetarity is also how we all need to both find ways to support ourselves in the face of all the kind of discourse of crisis and the actual effects of crises, whether that's social engagement or play or art or design, to feel that you have efficacy in the world, but also to, what I'm also hearing is to kind of take some risks and to kind of put yourself in the path of unexpected encounters and frictions and disagreement. And I don't know, this is kind of where my brain is going, but that it's, that it's constructive to have both of those experiences, right? And that in some ways, for one, you need the other.
Yeah, I really, and also I know we're well with the reception has arrived. I believe it's a modest crudité platter at the back, but what I do want to open up before we kind of move into more social informal mode is if our audience has any questions or comments. I want to make a bit of time for that. Everyone's just so enthralled by just like so much. Oh my gosh! Well, maybe at the end, we'll have to take a group photo around this table. It's kind of wonderful, wonderfully staged. I think the flower at the bottom. But I think what I did want to do, oh good, our photographer is still here, excellent, is read my messy notes, but only so it's gonna be fragmentary, but I think there was some moments of that I really got so much out of today, so really thank you for bringing your, your willingness to entertain this bigger question and really double down and be so generous with your work, your time, your insights and energies. So I will just say a few of the notes that I had across the day. Let our environments automate our machines. Playful practice, bracket childhood denial. Enumeration of complexity. Climate trials. Architectural imaginary, the coarseness or bluntness of the tools we use. Scale and energy accumulation. Offsetting. All right, here we are. Yeah, don't take notes like me. This is not good. Refuse to be absorbed by capitalist surface. Failure of representation. Glitter in the rubble. Texturized by the environment. It is metabolized in our bodies. Inability for photogrammetry to pick up reflections. Impossible geography. Specters, spheres. No-stop garden. Detect scars. Seeing from below in long exposure. Exposure, transcorporeality. And unstable edge, flickering back and forth with each other. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to all of you for joining us.